So glad to have you back for another episode of Curiosity Not Judgment. Welcome. My name is Birga.
And I'm Gary.
So, we have been debating what to talk about today and kind of kicked around a few ideas. And here's one that I think both Gary and I are eager to explore a little bit more deeply as we do it live time here on this recording. But really, the question of, am I worth something? Or conversely, am I struggling with worthlessness, feelings of worthlessness? And that sounds like a really dark, scary thing to ask, but I think if we're all being honest with ourselves, there's been seasons of our life when we have stopped and we've really contemplated that. And I think it's worth diving into a little bit more deeply today.
And there's surface. I mean, there's always, the peeling the onion. There's the deep question. Is you went right there. Am I worthless? But we all have self-doubt,
Yes.
and we all deal a little bit with fear of missing out, fear of not contributing, fear of being seen as less than.
Yeah.
So I think we can maybe start there and not go so deep so fast. But
Okay.
but it stems to that feeling of sometimes being worthless in a given situation. Hopefully, we don't feel worthless overall.
Right.
But if we don't explore it sometimes and we just ignore it, and I'm really good at that. If you have that nagging thing and you just ignore it and try to put it out of your mind, I think it gets worse.
Yeah.
It's one of those things that doesn't get better by trying to ignore it or being in denial.
Right. Absolutely. So I know I cut straight to the heart of the question, but I think it's really worth examining if we know what the key message is as we talk about this through the episode, really understanding some of the things that we do, whether it be self sabotage or asking different questions to get to that posturing to really understand what someone else thinks about you. It all comes down to really that internal dialogue that we're trying to answer that question. Do I have value? Do you see worth in me? Or conversely, am I worthless? And I instantly think of the song Cats in the Cradle.
Mm.
I don't know why, but the narrative that plays through that song about father and son vying for the attention of the father. And, he's too busy, too much to do, and the message is received so that by the time the son, is at a point where he wants freedom, he wants to go out, and the father realizes, oh man, I didn't invest the time into him. I didn't participate in his, childhood experiences. I didn't go out and play catch. I didn't do all these things. Then it's almost too late, and
Mm-hmm.
it's the sad narrative of that song. But I think it really speaks to kind of the generational position of, in your young days as you're trying to get the attention of a parent, when you're in your teen years trying to set out on your own and make your mark on the world.
And get attention from your peers.
Yes. And then you get into young love and early marriage years, having your own children. And then you've gone a full generation and the cycle starts again.
Mm-hmm. And as a matter of fact, the end of that song, he does become just like his dad because he's too busy to spend time with his kid. And it's the bane of being a parent. Is finding that meaningful mix. I hate the word balance, but finding that meaningful mix based on the season of life that you're in, and there's going to be times when you're going to have to pick who you're going to disappoint. I heard something the other day that I really liked, and that was you don't get to please everyone. You're going to disappoint someone. The deal is you get to choose who you disappoint.
Yeah.
And should you disappoint your employer over your family? Probably, but those aren't always easy decisions to make.
Right.
And again, I think there is a good, meaningful mix, a good portfolio of how we spend our time. But that is the bane of existence for a parent: is how much time can I spend with my spouse and with my children, versus building a life and a family, or a business, or a sustainable budget, so to speak. And so that's a part of it. We still have the choice, though, of feeling rejected or not. Now, one could argue you can't put that on a child because
Right.
they don't have the maturity to make that choice. But I would posit that even as adults, we sometimes we get a miscue about someone who doesn't choose to spend time with us as we're worthless.
Right. Right. Well, I think we've all been in circumstances and situations, whether you're recalling back to your years as a kid or you're all the way into yesterday and remembering a conversation where you felt shut down or, time wasn't granted you. I think, yes, we all have to come to that point where we're asking ourselves, okay, is this really a mark on myself and my value, or does this have something to do with the other person's schedule, the other person's priorities,
Mm-hmm.
and really being intentional about being curious? And you started by saying that the children don't have a maturity to kind of go through that process. And I'm wondering, is there some questions that we could equip children with, whether
Mm.
our children or grandchildren, to be able to start the routine of being curious about a situation so that the natural default is not, I don't have value, my dad doesn't want to see me, etc.
Well, I'm thinking back to the playground in fourth grade, right, where kids would say, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me," as a defense mechanism,
Mm-hmm.
because words did hurt back
Yeah.
then,
Oh yeah.
and deeply. And the popularity on the playground and who was cutting down who was a big part of life in
Mm-hmm.
school. And is that as much of a learning or practice field as math class at that point, right? Because
Sure.
the socialization part of school is one of the most
Huge.
important. I think a lot of people are seeing that now with COVID and
Mm-hmm.
keeping kids home. The social awareness and social part of school, which was kind of not dying, but it was diminished anyway
Mm.
with social media and our electronics. And now we just take it away entirely. How do we interact with people, and how do we become not only self-aware, but how are we aware of what our actions, how they're affecting other people? And are we asking curious questions about that? And then as people interact with us, are we asking real questions? In Proverbs it says an insult is like the dive of a wren or something. And I guess when you come near the nest of a wren, which is a bird about that big, and they swoop at you, they're not going to hurt you,
Mm.
right? But it appears like
Oh, I
they
see.
might hurt
Okay.
you, right?
Yeah, it'll
And
make you
so
flinch.
that make you flinch.
Yeah.
And so the point of the proverb is an insult is like that. It may appear like
Mm.
it's going to hurt you, or may even be intended to hurt you, but it can't hurt you
Mm.
unless you let it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so, but that's easy to think about here, and it's much harder to feel here.
Right. Right. So, for those listening rather than watching, it's easier to process mentally than to
Sorry.
interpret in the heart. Right.
Yeah, yeah.
So I have to go back though to how do we start equipping our children and our
Yeah.
grandchildren to be curious, so that this doesn't become just the characteristic that they default to. And I think this is so big, and I don't have any answers. I'm really genuinely processing this as we speak right now. But if you've got a 5-year-old that goes to dad or goes to grandpa and says, "Hey, can you go out and play catch with me?" As the song alludes to, if the answer is no because of whatever task that's at hand that prohibits that attention, is there opportunity for us to train our children to be curious about the situation so that they can understand this is not a personal reflection on you, your value, your my love for you, my intention to be with you, but it has everything to do with the tasks at hand that are demanding my time right now. And I don't know. I really feel like this is a conversation that we need to explore as adults towards children, so that we have this epidemic of mental health
Mm.
crisis right now. And I believe the social media compounds everything. And so yeah, this to me is very heavy on my heart.
Well, okay, so let's start with the 100,000 foot level. You want home to be a sanctuary for the kids,
Yeah.
first of all, right? You want them to feel comfortable, loved, regardless of what's going on in the outside, big ugly world, or what's said on the playground, or all of the affronts and things, and teachers and school bus drivers everybody else they meet in their life, that when they come home, it feels like a safe sanctuary full of love. So I think starting there, even if you're working really hard, you can at least be intentional about creating that.
Yeah.
Second, when one of the kids comes and says, hey, can you do this with me? I used to try to be intentional about, okay, well, I'm going to try to spend this much time with each kid, right? And so then make an appointment, right? Okay, we're all used to making appointments. Put it in your calendar and say, okay, I can't go out and throw the ball with you right now, but Saturday from 1 to 2, let's make an appointment. You know, let's be intentional about that. And then the thing about that is, even if 1 o'clock on Saturday something else is going on, everybody can recognize that and say, okay, let's intentionally move it now. Something else has come up. Let's do it Sunday at 2, or something like that. And I think that those are two ways. But I think the main thing that the child is looking for is a sense of self-worth in the parents spending time with them.
Right.
So if that's the case and you can't do it now, talking about doing it at a future date is one part of it. Another part is, okay, I can't go out and throw the ball with you, but let's spend 5 minutes doing something else. Or let's do something else together, or let's find another thing. I've got to, as soon as I get done with this pile of work, I've got to go and look into what's going on with the lock on the car or something like that. Do you want to do that together, right? Do you want to join me in something that I've got to do anyway? Anyway, a couple of ideas, but it's a real problem when we've got this life where everything is just like bam, 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 and we're all scheduled, and there's no margin, back to the famous book.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we're going to solve this during this episode, but I certainly can recognize that there's going to be, again, as we grow, as we age and progress, this is an ongoing struggle, and it manifests itself in different ways. And maybe by the time that you've reached teen years, the question is, more along the lines of, do you value me if I do X? Will you feel like I'm important if I reject your advice? Well, not that these are said out loud, but it's the internal dialogue, right? And I think it's just this ongoing quest of validation, and do I matter? Or again, subsequently, do I not have value in your eyes?
So, I think we have to start with a basic premise of that we do have value as individuals. There is no one like us. I love the adage, be yourself, everyone else is taken. And there's value in who we are intrinsically, even if it doesn't feel that way all the time.
Yeah.
How do we build on that? How do we build on that for others, and how do we build on that for ourselves?
Right. Well, I think it has to start with asking the question about the story that you're telling yourself. Is the narrative that's playing in my head factual, or have I imagined it to be this way? And to really pause and to let that be your first curious question, because I can tell you there's been a number of circumstances where I have felt rejected, and the story that plays in my mind can very quickly end up with, well, they think I'm worthless. But that's not the case. There's been a disagreement, there's been a differing of opinions on something, and the authority has chosen to go a different way. But that doesn't make my value any less. It makes the way that I wanted to travel, or the proposal that I had put before the authority, makes it the one not selected. But the two, you can't make it an equation, right? My proposal has been dismissed, therefore I am worthless. It's not an algebra equation.
No, and it certainly is not. Covey used to talk about the social mirror, and when I say Covey, Stephen Covey, who was a leadership guru back in the 80s, he used to talk about the social mirror, and that we need to have our own mirror that reflects reality versus just listening to the social mirror, which is all those things that people tell us.
Yeah.
And not only reflect back to us, but also try to tell us what to do, right? One of the things that I've been really working on lately is is to do some quiet time and start my activities during the day based on my values and my goals and what I'm trying to get accomplished before I open up my emails, because emails just reflect what everybody else wants you to do.
Sure.
And reflects their thoughts and their thoughts sometimes about you. And so at least start on the vector of the day on stuff that's important to me. But back to the subject at hand, what can we do to make sure that that we have some intrinsic self-worth going into any situation, even if we know there's going to be rejection? Now, there's a whole lot of layers. It's very three-dimensional, four-dimensional, five-dimensional on this. One, it's one thing not to be heard once. It's quite a different thing to not be heard for the thousandth time.
Sure.
Especially if you're in an organization that doesn't seem to listen to anything that you say or do. Now, I would challenge that it's anything. A lot of times we put more value on certain things and less value on others, and the organization is listening to us, and we do have influence in some area,
Right.
even if it's not as big as we want.
Yeah.
There is some influence there, so let's not fool ourselves and think it's zero. But if we continuously get rejected, especially on the ideas, especially the ones, if this supposedly is our role, is to come up with these ideas, then what does that do to you?
Oh, it's demoralizing.
So what do you do in that situation?
Well, I think being curious, again, as is the theme of this entire podcast, is the critical response you have to have in that moment. And there may be a point in which, as you continue to go and ask questions and go a little bit deeper and deeper, there might be, in some situations, the end conclusion that this person does not see my value. Therefore, this is no longer a safe environment for me to remain in.
Mm-hmm.
And that could be a valid end conclusion after asking those questions. But as you're asking the questions and you're genuinely being curious and being willing to be honest with yourself, in that process, hopefully you stumble upon a question that goes something like, am I feeling rejected because of past hurts that don't have anything to do with this present situation?
What am I bringing to this situation? Yes.
Is this something that I can dismiss as a one-time event in my professional journey or in my personal situation, however this is playing out, or is this a repeated pattern with the same individual? And then you can continue to layer on the questions until you kind of get to the end conclusion, like, no, I've blown this out of proportion, or I've assessed this and this isn't a safe place for me.
Mm-hmm. And you went to safe place. That's a word for me that is interesting for me to hear. Safety to me is, am I about to get my head cut off, or is someone about to shoot me? And I understand you're using it even emotionally safe, right? Okay. So in that case, yeah, and your long-term well-being. Now, I guess this is where the whole crux of the matter is. Do we feel emotionally safe? I think that's an interesting question that's a corollary to, do I have self-worth? If I have self-worth, I think there's some correlation, maybe even a causation, that your self-worth makes you feel safe, regardless of how other people treat you. There's extremes, of course, but I think if you bring that worth, self-worth, confidence, safety into the world, you're far less apt to feel unsafe. Does that make sense?
It does. I'm just trying to think through certain scenarios. So if you've got somebody listening right now that has turned in 95 resumes, never gotten an interview, is feeling utterly rejected from the employment circuit, needs a position, it's really hard to feel that you have value. It's really
absolutely
hard to get to that right, healthy mental place.
No, there's no question, and we've touched on this before, and there's certain activities that that we need to do in those situations, right? And go grab a copy of What Color Is Your Parachute. I mean, go volunteer. We've talked about this before. Don't stand still and get into your own spiral, because I think there's something to what you're saying there, in that if you're getting continuously rejected and you're taking each one. It's almost like a blow, and in like a video game where you see your strength dwindling, right?
Yeah.
And you feel like, oh my God, I'm about to die. I think if you are in that spiral, I think we have to be very intentional about being aware of that and just do some activities that helps us get out of that spiral, because I can imagine that that would even affect the way you interview.
Oh, absolutely.
And could become more of a self-fulfilling prophecy that way. But yeah, I mean, look, we're both sitting here. We have gainful employment, and we live in a house with a roof over our head, and we haven't starved, at least not unintentionally for a while. So it's easier for us to say, well, pick yourself up for your bootstraps, do some things, volunteer, etc. If you are in a very discouraging situation, it's very difficult to get out of that.
Yeah.
But I think it goes back to what you started the whole podcast with, which is, what is my self-worth?
Right.
If you know that you have some self-worth, and maybe even a better question is what you talked about with your children. How do we build self-worth in our children? How do we build and maintain self-worth in ourselves?
Yeah.
Because if we have that self-worth in ourselves, it's not, no matter how many rejections we get, but it's close. I mean, it certainly makes the rejections, even if they seem like they're piling on, easier to take if we are doing some things to improve our self-worth. So what can we do to improve our self-worth?
Yeah. I know we've talked about this briefly in another episode, but who is the person whose face lights up when you walk in the room?
Yeah.
And to really ask yourself that question. And I think if you are in a spiral of negative thinking and a negative self-narrative about your worth, contemplate who that person is. Who lights up when you walk in the room? And pay that person a visit,
Yep.
give them a phone call.
Yep.
Let that be a very intentional interruption to that downward spiral. But then to ask those questions, if you can't come up with a name, or if you can't reach them or whatever, you've got to really stop and ask yourself those questions. Are my feelings based on reality? Are they based on the past? Am I doing anything to perpetuate my emotional degradation? And to really be intentional, ask yourself some good questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and those questions need to lead to an action.
Yes.
Of how do I get myself out of this?
Yeah.
And now, we're not psychologists or psychiatrists.
Yeah.
We did spend last night in a Best Western, whatever the old commercial was. But the point of that is, if you're aware that you're in a bad place, we have to develop tools, all of us, to figure out how to turn that around.
Yeah.
It's okay to wallow for a little bit. It's like the dude who wrote PQ writes about pain. Pain is useful. You put your hand on a hot stove, pain is a good thing to tell you to get your hand away, otherwise it's going to be damage.
Yeah.
The point of it, though, is to feel it and then get away from it. So I think it's the same thing here. If we're feeling unworthy, it's okay to feel that. There's going to be situations in our time where we get a tinge of that. And it's okay to feel it. And really, the curious part is, why do I feel that?
Yeah.
Like you said, what am I bringing to this? But then get out of it. Stop doing that. Take your hand off the stove. Because keeping your hand on the stove is going to cause damage.
Yeah.
And eventually permanent damage.
Yep. So we are very close to time, but I do want to end on a positive note. And you've got a little list in front of you that you've generated that's kind of your daily mantra, the start to your day, about statements of affirmation to kind of reset. Would you read just a couple of those? And maybe let's end with an exercise of be thinking about this in your own life, and what could you put to paper that could be a saying or a list that you repeat on a daily basis to make sure that you are starting out on the right foot and you're remembering the truth about your value.
So, and I don't do this so that I feel so great about myself and Pollyanna that I think I'm the greatest person in the world to go out there, but it does help to get out of the the fear mode, like I have to promote my agenda, etc. So I start out, and this is called a manifesto. You can read many books on why this is important to do in the morning, but mine starts out as, I am Gary O. I'm a little out there. I'm the proud son of a naval aviator. I moved 18 times by the time I went to college. And it starts doing some of the facts, some of the things that influence my life and who I am. And then things like, I think through and with others. I can think by myself, but I like to have a bunch of people around a whiteboard, and bounce things off each other. Now, one that I wrote on here, I seek others' approval and I fear rejection. And what I've been doing over time is I don't seek others' approval and I don't fear rejection. And so there's things that I put, I am funny, I'm playful, I'm sensitive, I'm acceptance. I sometimes try to prove and perform and promote my agenda. So those are things, so I have enough things in there, but it is realistic about who I am. By the way, this started out as like 5 lines. It's now both sides of a piece of paper. And it ends with, this person does not need to fear, perform, prove, or protect, which are things that I saw as themes in here as I was writing.
Yeah.
And reading this every day has really, it puts me on a good foot to not be in a situation where if somebody doesn't like one of my ideas, which used to slay me, it's like, what do you mean? It's a perfect idea. Then I don't get affected like that. And I'm more curious, like, oh, okay, well, this is something that needs to be solved. What's your idea? Or how could we work together on something that's similar? Or what do you like about it? What don't you like about it? I mean, it gets me away from just being defensive and reactive.
Yeah, that's good. I think so. Some good exercises to start really asking yourself some questions. If you're in a cycle of, downward self-talk and of feelings of rejection, but then also an exercise to be having an honest assessment of yourself, your characteristics, but ending with some statements, positive affirmations about how you're going to step out of the negative and into some of the strengths that you display in the characteristics that you've been given. And so I think we better call it quits for today. Lots more to talk about, as always. Join us online at curiositynotjudgment.com, and we'll see you next week.
Take care.